Hey guys, and welcome back to the newest video on the channel that I'm very excited to make because it is the review of the new God of War for PS4, which I just finished playing this past weekend. Have very, very strong opinions about. Very, very excited to make this video. I'll preface it by saying that this video will contain spoilers because I wouldn't really be able to do justice to this game without getting into some of the spoilery content. So, spoiler warning, do not watch this if you don't want to know some of the big twists and turns of this game. I'm going to do this gaming spotlight like I do all of mine, which is to break the game down into 4 different sections: the story and narrative, the visuals and the visual design, the audio, which includes both music and voice acting, and then the gameplay. But before I go into all that stuff, I'd just like to say 2 things. One, in a previous video, I did explain that my point of reference for this game is that I've played God of War 2, and God of War 3. I haven't played any of the other games in the series, but I wanted to play those 3 because I knew they would sort of establish the story arc that, sets up this new God of War game. So I have played those 3. That's kind of where I'm coming from as a point of reference when talking about this. Secondly, I will break down my overall thoughts into those 4 sections, but I just want to give a brief synopsis of my feelings of the game real quickly so you kind of know what you're getting into with this review. Wow, this game, I was so excited to play it, and it's an incredibly rare case of a game fully living up to and actually exceeding expectation. Rest assured, this review will be extremely positive, extremely glowing, with some critique, because I do feel like there's some areas that this game could have handled better in certain ways, but, I don't know that a perfect game exists, so there's always going to be some level of critique. But by and large, this is going to be a glowing review. I think this is an absolute masterpiece. I'm not exactly sure where this game falls on my all-time favorite games list, but it's in the top 10. I enjoyed it just that much. So settle in. Here's my gaming spotlight on God of War, broken down into these 4 parts, and then I'll give my restate my overall thoughts towards the end of it. So let's start off with the story. I was very, very excited when this game was announced and reading more and more about this game coming into the launch, because if there's one thing I really didn't particularly take a liking to in the first 3 games, it was the narrative. I actually thought Kratos was a fairly one-note and fairly unsympathetic character through the first 3 games. They do try to make him a little bit more complex, in the earlier games in the series, by going into his circumstances, by going into what happened to his family, by going into the level of regret he has over those things. But by and large, he's a very boisterous, very predictable, very over-the-top character without a whole lot of nuance that I just didn't have all that much of a personal connection to in the first 3 games. I thought the first 3 games excelled based on style and combat and the level of violence and, those aspects far more so than they did on the narrative being anything to write home about. I'm not that crazy about Greek mythology, so the Greek mythology of the original games was never all that exciting to me. It was certainly cool to see some of the Greek gods, certainly cool to see some of the Titans and things like that, but Greek mythology wasn't something that drew me to the series. So when I heard that this was going to be a more mature God of War, a more emotional and dramatic God of War set against a Norse mythology backdrop, I was actually really, really excited because the Norse mythology sounded cooler than Greek to me. A more adult, more mature, nuanced, and complex Kratos sounded interesting to me. So I was really, really anticipating what this game would have to offer when it came to its narrative. And I can say it delivered on everything I hoped it would when I first read about it. The quick setup for the game here is that since the end of God of War 3, Kratos has left Greece after surviving the events of that game. He's made his way to Scandinavia, where in whatever amount of time has passed, he's remarried a woman named Faye and had a son with her named Atreus. This game begins after Faye has passed away, and Kratos and his son Atreus have burned her on a funeral pyre and are taking her ashes to spread them on the top of the tallest mountain peak in the realms as something she had requested before she passed away. So already the setup is fairly emotional. It's, a great setup for an epic adventure like this. You've got these 2 characters traversing this wild, dangerous terrain on this emotional epic path. So, that's kind of a classic adventure setup already. And, the game delivers. The game allows the events to unfold exactly as epic and emotional as that story could possibly be. Kratos is so much more complex and nuanced and interesting in this game than in previous games, which was so fundamental for the story of this to work. He begins the game like fairly hard-ass, fairly cold, fairly detached, as he often was in the earlier games. A little bit sadder, a little bit more reserved than the previous games, but that same level of just cold, unfeeling demeanor that he had in the previous games is on full display here at the beginning. But that really melts away over the course of the game, and you really get to see him as a far more complex, a far more three-dimensional, a far, far more interesting, in my opinion, character, as he reveals more and more about his own past to his son Atreus, as he gets closer to Atreus, as he becomes more accepting of his own failures, tries to teach his son about the right way to do things as both a mortal and a god, as he tells his son over the course of the game. And the voice acting and the writing among his character development, as he grows from this very one-note character to what he is by the end of the game, it's just great. It's very realistic. The character doesn't completely change from one to the other in an instant. There's a lot that happens that leads him to that point. His relationship with Atreus is fantastic. It's humorous at times. It's sad and sort of, off-putting at times when they're in conflict with one another. And it's very, very touching and very, very just moving, when when they have moments of real closeness and bonding between them. And those were things I really hoped this game would deliver, because in aiming for a story like this that really goes for a lot more emotional resonance, you need those things to work. You need Atreus and Kratos to be three-dimensional characters. You need their banter to work. You need to understand why they feel the way they do about one another and about Atreus' mother and Kratos' wife. You need all that to work in order for this game to really hit the heights that it does. And like I said, all those elements really work well. The Norse mythology is incredibly cool. I just think Norse mythology is cooler than Greek, personally. I think Norse mythology is a bit closer in what it contains and what it involves to classic fantasy that I'm into more so than Greek. Norse mythology has all kind of, and Greek does too, but Norse mythology has tons of interesting past conflicts, monsters, gods with insane powers. I know most mythologies do as well, but Norse just kind of falls more in line with traditional fantasy, which I really like. And all those elements are on full display here in a fantastic way. I'll get into one of my critiques now about the game, which is a heavy spoiler, which is, the game only really scratches the surface of the Norse pantheon and Norse mythology. You only directly interact with a handful of important characters from Norse mythology over the course of the game. And spoiler alert, again, the game clearly sets up for at least one sequel, if not more, based on its ending, in which upon defeating Balder, who was one of Odin's sons, you go back to your home after the final boss battle. You have this premonition, dream sequence, future sequence, whatever you want to call it, where Thor lands with his hammer and challenges Kratos and Atreus to combat, and the game kind of ends there. Clearly setting up for much more to come in the future for the series, I think, which I'll buy day one gladly because this game's awesome. But in knowing this game was going to be based in Norse mythology, I was expecting the full gamut. I was expecting a game where you come directly into conflict with Odin, Thor, Loki, Tyr, all the kind of big prime examples of Norse mythology and, of the Norse pantheon. And in this game, you really only scratch the surface of that. You explore some of the 9 realms of Norse mythology. Think Jotunheim, Muspelheim, Midgard, Alfheim, Niflheim, and Helheim. There's a few of the realms that you don't have access to in this game, which was a little frustrating, but at the same time, you understand the game can only be so big. But like I said, your main point of conflict in this game is Balder, who is one of Odin's sons, who is kind of following you throughout the game, causing you problems for reasons unbeknownst to you at first. And while he was a really great character, again, a character with great development, a great villain, really well acted, really well portrayed, I kept expecting us to eventually kind of reach higher up the pantheon or see more gods you come into conflict with. You meet a couple more, but by and large, this game really only scratches the surface of some of the key figures of Norse mythology, which I can only imagine will be handled in sequels. But if I have one complaint about the game, it's that it's sort of a table setter for the rest of the franchise. You don't really dig into a lot of the overarching antagonists in this game. You meet the goddess Freya, who at first appears to you as someone you just refer to as the Witch of the Woods, who actually helps you throughout the game, but you later learn that she's actually the goddess Freya, and in killing Balder towards the end of the game, you come directly into conflict with her. I'm sure she'll be an antagonist in a future game, but that leaves a lot of really key antagonists for you to take on in future games, and it would have been cool to maybe see some more of them in this game. But, I can only complain so much. Like I said, the emotional elements of the game are fantastic. You get to see some really interesting parts of Norse mythology. You get a lot of backstory via lore scrolls you read, via spoken mouth or spoken word lore you're given by NPCs in the game. It throws a ton at you, and it's all really, really interesting. I wish some more of it was in the game versus just hearing about it, but the game could only be so big, and what is there is fantastic. I thought Kratos and Atreus, both fantastic. Mimir, who's this head you carry around after you detach his head from his body, since his body's been trapped by Odin. Awesome character, hilarious. He serves as sort of an encyclopedia of knowledge for the rest of the game. Tells you a lot of backstory, explains a lot of Norse lore to you, kind of advises you on your travels, and just hilarious character. One of the better sidekicks I can remember in recent gaming. Really funny when the game gets dramatic, serves well at that too. Just a fantastic, story device to fill you in on some of the backstory and also interject some really funny stuff here or there. When you later go back to the top of the highest peak in Midgard and hold up Mimir's head and show him his body missing the head, and he comments something like, there's an image no man should ever have to see. Thank you for that. Like that got a genuine laugh out loud from me. He had some just hilarious one-liners that really made the game. Other small characters like Brock and Sindri, who are two dwarven blacksmiths that, serve as NPC shopkeepers for you and also help upgrading your equipment and give you some quests. Kind of hit or miss. Some of their dialogue didn't really land for me, but they were still fairly entertaining, and I liked a God of War game that had, some more side content like that. So story, great. An emotional journey, gives a lot more depth to Kratos. Atreus is a great addition, both as a foil to Kratos and as his own character. Side characters like Freya, Mimir, villains like Balder, Magni, and Modi, who are two of Thor's sons, all just great. No real complaints about the story, other than I wish we got a bit more of what was told to us actually shown to us, but I imagine those will come in further games. And as one last aside, holy crap, at the end when it's revealed that Atreus is actually part giant, because Atreus' mother and Kratos' deceased wife, Faye, was actually a giant. So Atreus is part giant, part god, and he is actually the Norse god Loki. So I spent most of the game wondering when Loki would appear, and it turns out that he's been there the whole time because Kratos' son is actually Loki, and I'm sure his son being Loki is going to factor quite heavily into future installments of the game. So twists and turns left and right, fantastic story with awesome story beats throughout. I could talk so much more about it, but I want to keep this video under a half an hour, so let's keep moving. The visuals. Wow, this game is completely and absolutely gorgeous. And not just gorgeous in that the graphical technology is powerful, but the visual design of the game is absolutely gorgeous also. This is one of the most impressive looking games I've ever seen. The textures, the lighting, the scope of the world, all just as good as anything I've ever personally seen. I'm not a PC gamer, so my point of reference really is PS4. But amongst PS4 games, it's probably the best looking I've ever personally seen. Just jaw-dropping environments, wherever you travel. The characters look incredible. The amount of detail on the characters, their expressions, their faces, the animations of the combat, their armor, all just absolutely incredible, the level of detail. And the variety. I absolutely love in games that are equipment heavy, which this game is, when you have gear. I know it's a small thing, but even gear that just changes the appearance of your character so drastically just gives you this feeling of customization and this feeling of control that's just so cool to me. And the gear really runs the gamut in this game and just looks freaking awesome top to bottom. So on a technical level, the graphics are completely insane and amongst the best I've ever seen. But the graphics are so impressive and further aided by the fact that the graphical design and visual design of this game is awesome. The best graphics in the world on a boring, against a boring backdrop really aren't going to be that thrilling. But the game is designed so incredibly well. I like the new character designs. Kratos is a bit more filled out. He's got the beard. He looks a bit more worn and weary, which worked really well. But the design for him and Atreus, both them physically and even things like their tattoos and their markings, really well done to make them really interesting looking characters. But the environments and the world of Scandinavia and of Norse mythology in here is just completely insane. As you travel, you're going through environments ranging from where Freya, the Witch of the Woods, lives, which is this absolutely gorgeous, colorful, red, orange, purple, blue forest with beautiful plant life. It's this idyllic, paradise-looking place. From there to incredibly creepy, caverns and dungeons and castles strewn with bones that are, genuinely creepy, somewhat, unsettling. These dark, awful places to places like Alfheim, which is one of the realms you go to in the game, which is the home of the Light Elves and Dark Elves. That's, again, just completely awe-inspiring. This beautiful body of water with these glistening beaches and this beautiful temple, set against them. And the game just looks absolutely incredible. It's so jaw-dropping from one environment to the next. So many of the creatures and the scale in this game are just jaw-dropping. There's a character called the World Serpent, who is sort of a character you encounter a couple times in the game and an important figure in Norse mythology, who is utterly massive. He's called the World Serpent because his body literally stretches and spans an entire realm of the world. And the first time he's seen in the game, the sheer size of him, how cool he looks, how absurdly he dwarfs the characters. It just truly awe-inspiring. It reminds you big time of what the God of War series is so great at, presenting these massive, imposing, insane, larger-than-life characters and situations and really bringing them to life in a beautiful way. And this game does that fantastically again. You travel to the body of this dead frost giant, and the giant is so unfathomably big that things like his individual fingers, are probably 50 to 100 feet tall alone. You can see his body from miles away. It's just, the sheer sense of scale, size, and beauty in this game are just completely what you'd expect from the God of War series, but taken to another level. Beautiful, beautiful sights to see, scary sights to see, really interesting creature designs for some of the creatures you encounter and some of the creatures you fight. You fight everything from things called Draugr, which are like these reanimated dead bodies filled with almost a fiery substance, to ogres, to trolls, to dragons, to skeletons, to revenants, which are like almost witch, sorcerer type things. All of them look fantastic. just, I mean, the design top to bottom, they don't look like they skimped anywhere. It's a beautiful game in the way it was designed, and a beautiful game in terms of the graphics being, in my opinion, cutting edge. I think this sets the tone and sets the bar for anything in this genre, and really anything on PS4 and really all consoles moving forward. It's just that great looking. And so many moments aren't just beautiful to look at, but are also really exciting to behold because of the way you're drawn into, what's unfolding on the screen. It brings back QuickTime events, but in a much less hammy way as the previous games. There's a lot of things that feel like cutscenes that you actually end up being able to play through, but it doesn't require quite as much button mashing as the old games. But moments like when you're riding the guy Thamur, the dead frost giant, riding his hammer from, where it's hung up in the sky, falling on it, smashing through this ice. Visually stunning sequence, the way it's framed, the way it's directed, just as good as, any action sequence you'll see in any form of media. When you're fighting Baldur at the end and you're literally falling through the sky, with Kratos beating the crap out of Baldur while Atreus, flies just above you or falls just above you, shooting arrows through him. I mean, it's just a visually stunning, intense, awesome game, top to bottom. The combat looks great. All the runic attacks you can do, which are sort of your special attacks, look fantastic. The sort of third-person close-up view brings everything really, in your face. So the violence, the combat, everything is just so intense, so visceral, so awesome to behold. Just a spectacle top to bottom, and just flawless work. The audio, the music and voice acting. Bear McCreary, who's done, original soundtrack work for things like The Walking Dead, does the score here, and the score's great. The score's exactly what you'd want for an epic like this. It's bombastic and, adrenaline-inducing at times. It's more reserved and quiet and sad at times, but by and large, it's an improvement over the previous soundtracks in the series, I think. There's some songs that I really like from it. It's not so much a soundtrack that I would say, these tracks are my favorite, I'm going to go out on my own time and listen to them. It more works as a whole, and it more works in the context of the game. But yeah, just beautiful. There's some vocal, choir type stuff with some chanting and some that really underscore some of the dramatic moments of the game. And there's some big, powerful string and horn music for some of the action sequences of the game. And by and large, it works perfectly with the game. So I don't have as much to say about the score here, other than it's really, really good and works perfectly. But the score is probably the aspect of this game that I took away the least from. The voice acting is fantastic. The voice acting itself, I'd say, is really, really great. The writing, in terms of the dialogue, is a little bit goofy at times. For the most part, it's really good, but some of the ways that the characters talk, particularly Atreus and the two dwarven characters, Brock and Sindri, it feels out of place at times because the way they speak is so modern, with a bunch of weird sarcasm and profanity, and those things are perfectly fine. A lot of times they made me laugh, and I don't think they've really held the game back, but they do feel kind of goofy and kind of out of place at times in, an old Norse mythology setting. But aside from that, there's little complaints and quirks. The voice acting, by and large, is very good. You can tell everyone here is giving their all. They're not phoning it in. It runs the gamut from hilarious one-liners, like I said, to some really dramatic, really moving, really powerful voice acting. I think it might be Christopher Judge, who plays Kratos in this game, does a fantastic job at really bringing some nuance to Kratos. Atreus' voice actor is great. Mimir's voice actor is hilarious. Freya's voice actor is really, really good. In the final fight with Baldur, when Freya's kind of screaming for you to not kill her son, because it's revealed that Baldur is actually Freya's son. Really great stuff, really, really intense, and just really well executed. It's important when a game aims to be a bit more mature and a bit more substantial like this, that the voice actors bring their A game, and they do here. And, you can certainly tell that, I think it's Jeff Barlog who directed this, knows what he's doing, got really good performances out of these people, and really wanted to make a game that has that level of polish. So, music, great, works very well in the context of the game, and is just really high caliber stuff. Voice acting great, and does a service and does justice to the level of writing and drama that's in the story. The gameplay, again, fantastic. The original God of War games, it was really fun to run around and crush your enemies and sort of, do everything that God of War came to be known for, but there wasn't a whole lot of variety. There wasn't a whole lot of side content. There was enough complexity on hard enough difficulties for the combat to be interesting, but this game just kind of takes everything the original God of War was known for, the fun combat, the levels of violence, the intensity, improves them all, expands upon them all, gives you a whole lot more to sink your teeth into. And since every other aspect of this game was already so great, taking the gameplay to another level just sets this game off as a masterpiece in my mind. The combat, which is a key element of any God of War game, is very, very good. You have the Leviathan axe, which is a new weapon here, which is an axe that you can throw. You have sort of a heavy throw command or a light throw command that Kratos can then summon the axe back to him at will. You've got a bunch of up-close melee attacks with the axe. You've got a whole set of skill trees for axe combat, for shield combat, for hand-to-hand combat, and for Spartan rage combat, all of which unlock new combos and new ways to approach those different combat modes. And then later on in the game, you actually get Kratos' old Blades of Chaos, which was a complete shock to me. I was so excited when that happened, partially because it was a cool callback to the other game, but also because it just added a whole nother aspect of the combat here. Now you've got a whole set of new combos for the blades. You've got the blades and the axe in conjunction. It allows you to kind of approach combat a bunch of different ways. You get a bunch of different runic attacks for the axe and blades that give you, the whole magical component. So combat has a lot of variety, a lot of depth. It really feels rewarding when you pull stuff off in combat in some of the harder fights. The viewpoint, the third person up close combat not only works in terms of it feels natural, it feels good, but it also just brings the violence that much closer. So some of the finishers in this game are just absolutely insane. I mean, I'm talking about you're fighting dark elves, you finish them by ripping their spears out of their hand. They try to run away from you and you impale them with the spear from a distance. It's just completely insane. You grab the Draugr enemies and other enemies and just rip them in half at the shoulder. You take these wolf-like, werewolf-like enemies and literally grab their jaw and rip their jaw and the entire front half, the skin from their chin to their waist completely off their body. And this is all shown way closer up than in previous God of War games. I mean, these kills are just so brutal, but they're so rewarding because the combat just feels so intense, so visceral, and so, even challenging at times that when you pull these things off in combat, it feels so good and looks so good. And that's classic God of War right there. The difficulty level in general, I think, worked. There was times when I felt I started to get so powerful that some combat became trivial, but then fights would come up that were hard enough that I thought, okay, this is fairly, fairly balanced, fairly even difficulty in terms of where I'd want it to be. I only played on the normal setting, so I can't complain a whole lot. If I really wanted more of a challenge, I could have played in a harder setting, but by and large, the difficulty, I think, was right. Lots of things this game introduces that the old games didn't so much introduce is a full gear system now where you can equip a chest item, a waist item, and a gauntlet item, each of which have different stats that affect your character, each of which have abilities, passive or active, that affect your character. You can stick gems and runes in each of your items to further customize them. So that adds a whole different aspect here of stat crunching, of customizing your character, of really tailoring the combat in the game to the way you want to play. Like I said, there's a whole set of skill trees. You can use either weapon. Each weapon has different handles you can equip that change the stats and add different effects to it. You have a talisman and different talismans you can equip that give you different stats and effects. So a lot more customizable when it comes to changing up Kratos' gear, which I absolutely love. And a lot of resources you can collect to craft new gear, upgrade your existing gear. So the gear system alone and the equipment and stat system add a whole nother level of complexity here that I love because it's more sort of RPG-ish, which I like anyway. The game isn't true open world in that there's times in the game when you're not able to go anywhere you want, where you're sort of stuck in a certain section and can't progress until you clear that section. But it is open world in the sense that once you get out of the beginning of the game, you gain access to this giant lake area, and from that lake area, you can travel to a bunch of different side areas and eventually different realms of Norse mythology, all of which have their own enemies, their own side content, their own optional bosses, their own items to find, which I love because, the old God of War did have stuff you could backtrack to find. It did have collectibles. But this just has way, way more. You're looking for hidden lore scrolls. You're looking for hidden treasure that provides you with some rare equipment and rare items. You're looking for hidden bosses, these Valkyries, which are sort of optional bosses you fight for a whole side quest in the game, which are the most challenging enemies in the game, and provide not only some cool difficulty, but a whole extra set of stuff to do. This game just offers you so much that I didn't think necessarily would be there in a God of War game. A bunch of side content, side quests, a ton of gear to customize, skills to customize, a bunch of ways to approach combat. It's just a bigger game, a bigger experience, a more open experience, and a more comprehensive experience than previous God of War games, all of which I love. I probably spent 30 to 35 hours, I'd say, since the game was released playing it. And in that time, I've beaten the story. I've done probably 95% of the side content. I've got probably 3 to 4 hours left of stuff to do before I've platinumed the game. And even then, there'd be stuff to do if I wanted to max every single item out in the game, which I don't plan to. I do want to platinum it, but by and large, the gameplay, just about every aspect of it, is improved from the original games. Combat's great. It's an improvement. The world's bigger. It's an improvement. There's more stuff to see. There's more stuff to customize. Like I said, things like the combat, when you're drawn in the form of cutscenes and finishers and quick time events, all work really, really well. They're super visceral. They're super intense. They're super great. So the gameplay is an A++. It took what God of War was, it brought it into the current age, the current trends in console gaming, and did it all very, very, very well. So guys, this video is already over a half an hour. I could sit here and talk about God of War forever, and I'm sure I only did a really cursory job of discussing a lot of these elements about this game. But if I haven't already made it abundantly clear, I think God of War is one of the best games I've ever played. I don't feel like I'd be presumptuous in saying this is one of the best games of all time. Santa Monica Studios, you really outdid yourself with this game. The story works, it's emotional, it's dramatic, it's far more nuanced than previous games in the series. The combat's awesome, the graphics are stunning, the music's great, the game's bigger and better in every way. It's filled with awe-inspiring, completely insane moments where you're, at the drop of a hat, attacked by a dragon one moment, then in a touching scene between father and son the next, then battling a god, who's resurrected a frost giant's corpse to attack you. It's just filled with awesome moment after awesome moment, and I could not get enough of playing this game. My few complaints, I wish we had gotten more, because it introduced so many cool gods and lore items that we don't get access to in this game that I figure we will in sequels. The enemy variety could have been a little bit greater. There's a lot of enemies, but you sort of see them all relatively early on in the game, and then beyond that, it's just sort of reskinned versions of those enemies. So that was a little bit frustrating at times, but those are my only two real complaints, that wouldn't just be ridiculous nitpicks. So guys, God of War is awesome. It set the bar for all action adventure that comes after it, and set the bar really for just single player experiences on consoles, in my opinion. It's just that good of a game. I'm going to give this a 9.6 out of 10. It's a masterpiece in my mind. I'd buy the collector's edition pre-ordered right now for the sequel if it were announced. I'm so excited to see where this game goes from here. And I think they've set themselves up for a lot of games to come, not only set within Norse mythology, but also shown that they can take Kratos and put him in different areas of the world and have the story remain fresh and exciting and cool. So if you like action adventure, buy this game today. If you like good single player experiences on consoles or any game, any gaming system for that matter, buy this game today. If you have any inclination of finding out what all the fuss is about, buy this game today, because I don't see how this game could disappoint anyone. You know, if you're going in for drama, action, violence, beautiful graphics, any of the above, you're going to love this game. So 9.6 out of 10. God of War is a masterpiece. Thank you for watching this 35 plus minute video, but I was so excited to talk about God of War. Go out, stop watching me right now, and play it soon. Take care, guys. Bye.